The question is that the motion be agreed to. Alfred Naro.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, it's a privilege and honour to take a call on this third reading for the Social Security Clothing Allowance for Orphans and Unsupported Children Amendment Bill in its third reading. And I just want to acknowledge Tracy Martin, who is the sponsor of the bill, as a private member's bill. The words that she has shared is both with passion and with a desire and a commitment, and that is reflective of Mrs Martin and her desire to see that this bill is not only championed in select committee but also through legislation so that it does achieve the intended result, which is to really have clothing parity. If we were to simplify the bill, and it's not a large bill, but it's a bill that makes an amendment that actually is very important. And again, it's the amendments are not large, but they're small, but they're effective. And it's, I suppose, reflective of the children that Mrs Martin is talking about, that there are children that are often unseen and unheard, and they are vulnerable, and yet though they are small, they're actually very important. So I think that the bill, and we acknowledge that the bill is important. It is important that though Mrs Martin talked about politics, I mean, politics is also about leadership, and I think that's what's important here. And it's the leadership that is shown to be able to take up that response. At the same time too, the sort of leadership that politics has, and I want to sort of just state this on the record for those who are listening out there, because it actually reflects on both sides of the House, whoever is in governing at that point in time, is that you're weighing up a number of different options. So you've got kin carers, you've got unsupported children and orphans, and at the other hand, you've got vulnerable children, you've got education, you've got health. There are lots of demands in which you have to balance the aspect of where you put your resources to best reflect the needs as where they're at. So I want to take up the points that Mrs Martin has put, that actually the Honourable Paula Bennett did take up the concern and champion the cause to ensure that $10 million was set aside to ensure that the kin carers were absolutely represented in, and also grandparents raising grandchildren. One of the things that both Mrs Martin and I did work on, and she made it very clear, was the Ministerial Reference Group. And that was chaired by Catherine Rich, and then also to Diane Vivian was there, who was a bundle of energy and joy, but at the same time too, she was constantly advocating. And I think if there's one person that I know that's such a strong advocate, and I too want to acknowledge Diane Vivian for her role in grandparents raising grandchildren. She actually conducted a survey, and with those surveyed as a result, so she wanted to say that her points were evidence-based, and I think that was really important because that's also what she put on the table as well. I want to acknowledge Linda Surtees from Foster Care, who again was also a very strong advocate, and balanced the aspect of when we're talking about clothing parity for foster carers and kin carers, that she too understood the importance of ensuring that that was there as well. And then also too the famous Katie Murray from all the way up in the far north, who reminded us very clearly that there are a number of Māori children that were actually in this situation, that were vulnerable, and in fact they made up the larger proportion of children that are in care. Of the 12,000 children that are in care, at least a third, if not more of those, were children that were Māori and that actually were part of Māori whānau and family as well. And I think that her advocacy, along with the others, was absolutely important to this. Along the reference group, though, I want to make a mention of this, is that Mrs Martin made it really clear that all the things that we were doing, extraordinary care fund and so forth, was not around the clothing parity. And she made sure that actually that the bill would find a passage so that it actually did have a way of addressing those areas of concern as well. So, Mr Speaker, I too want to just commend Mrs Martin, and I just want to talk just briefly about some of the points that we've been sort of sharing here. One of the ones is around kin carers. We know that there are 12,000 children that are in care, and I think the thing is it's the issues that have been the cause of that also too need to be of concern. These are vulnerable children, whether it be by death of parents, either both or one, or whether it be by breakdown in the family. It could also be through abuse and neglect. And then often we heard the stories where actually there was a knock on the door and there were these children that were bundled up and taken over to the care of grandparents, who often then had to readjust their own lives to be able to accommodate for the care of these children. And we believe that's really important, that we needed to address this as well. So the kin carers, I think, in acknowledging them now, and this bill has brought them to the forefront, where we can now acknowledge that not only there are foster carers, but there are kin carers and the role that they play. I also want to talk about the parenting toolbox that Mrs. Martin has been talking about, because I think actually that's quite critical. So along with grandparents raising children and parenting place, one of the things that Diane Vivian talked about was the fact that often they're in their twilight years. Here's the grandparents, they're sort of heading towards retirement, and all of a sudden they're faced with having to raise children again. And so they then have to readjust their lives. So the work that has been done through the government and through the Ministry of Social Development is to be able to partner with Parenting Place, a set of toolboxes that again allow them to sort of have what they call a refresher course, really. And I know that a number of grandparents have appreciated that as well. The other area that I think that's been important, which is relating to the bill and in support of the bill, is in regards to the Extraordinary Care Fund. Mr. Speaker, I do remember that in one of our reference group meetings, it was actually Katie Murray that brought up this point. She said, when we have these children in our care, there comes a time when you want to lift them out of the challenges that they face. They're often both emotionally, physically, they're psychologically, they're traumatised. And so how do you then sort of find a pathway for them to be able to reach their full potential, is what she talked about. And she said then, what if there was an opportunity to have a fund that allowed them to do extra things that would support the development of these children into the potential? And that's actually what has happened out of that. One of the recommendations was the Extra Care Fund. I'm happy to report to the House that 300 children and young people have benefited from this. In fact, the fund now, their grants for up to $2,000 per child, and this round of funding we've distributed 360,000 of those. The areas that of area that have the fund goes towards is extra tutoring for kids who are struggling in school, for instance, or orthodontic work not funded by the Ministry of Health. It covered costs to attend national, regional sports tournaments. In fact, Katie talked about that in the children that she was caring for and other carers that she knew of, there was a chance that they could actually then maybe be representing a regional sports team. And this was a great chance to be able to give them confidence. It was an opportunity to be able to build on their potential, and then hopefully out of their confidence and their potential, it would brought them out of the trauma that they were currently facing and experiencing, and actually give them a sense of hope to be able to develop their full potential as well. And we think that was important. One of the other things that the fund has also gone towards is music lessons where the child can progress ahead of their peers as well. Only 36 of those applicants were unsuccessful in the inaugural funding round, and so we think that has provided extra support to these children. And again, the key areas that have come out of the words of the grandparents raising grandchildren and the kin carers is this: they want their children to thrive, they want them to achieve, and they want them to belong, and that's really important as well. One of the other areas of support that goes with this bill is around the dedicated person at work and income. And this actually is important because while we've got the bill that's in place, one of the complexities and challenges that have come out of the Ministerial Reference Group in our conversations was often them going to explain at work and income their situation. Grandparents were unsure because often it was their own children, obviously, and then how would they explain some of the challenges that they faced, if there was a breakdown in the family or abuse and neglect. So what has actually happened is that the government has ensured that at work and income, they have assigned a manager at the national office to work with the grandparent raising grandchildren field officers to ensure that there's sensitivity and understanding, but also too that the pathway through to receiving the support is one that's a lot more seamless, and that the grandparents will receive the support that they need as well. Mr. Speaker, I just conclude my remarks, and I do take on board what Mrs. Martin has said, which is that there's a commitment that has to be made when a promise has been indicated in this bill. And yes, we know that the start date for this bill has been delayed to 2018. I think that shows a good omen for the 2017, obviously, election for the national government, who will continue to keep its promises. Not only to Mrs. Martin, because as she said, this bill is not about her. Actually, this is about the children, it's about the grandchildren, it's about the kin carers. So I conclude my remarks by actually acknowledging you, Tracy Martin, for your advocacy and for your championing, for also acknowledging Diane Vivian, a champion for the grandparents raising grandchildren, Linda Surtees for foster cares, Katie Murray up in the far north, but also all the other grandparents raising grandchildren and kin carers that are out there. We desire and hope that all the support that's been given, and even through this bill, will be of much support. And finally, as I said in the words, that these children will not only reach their full potential, but they will thrive, they will achieve, and that they will belong. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.